Have you ever wondered what mechanobiology is? Well, clicked on the right video. Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Gelser, and this is the first video of many that will be coming out teaching and talking about mechanobiology and topics of what mechanobiology is and really teaching it at the course. These are a combination of my doctorate as well as lectures I put together for some of my classes. So without further ado, let's dive into what is mechanobiology. When you really looking at mechanobiology, it's really a part of biomedical engineering. So in biomedical engineering, there now is two main camps how we can view this. One is the standard biomechanical engineering, looking at more mechanical forces on the broad scale of levels. Another one is mechanobiology, where mechanobiology really here is now looking at the cells more on as an engineer than where biomechanical engineering looks at, bones or the body as a whole instrument, investigating the forces and designing things to affect the human body. So when we look further in these fields, we can see, okay, so biomechanics or biomechanical engineering, really how I think of it is these kind of subsets. Bioimaging and instrumentation devices for medical purposes, CT, MRI, ultrasound, blood testing, so your blood cell counts and so forth. Other, diagnosing instruments and such. There's computational modeling. This requires a lot of math, a lot of programming, but really computational modeling and biomechanics tries to investigate mathematically the forces acting on an object, typically, a biological object, typically humans. There's some that do plants and other things and the animals, but most of the time it's on humans. There's traditional biomechanics. A lot of people think of like exoskeletons, like Iron Man, or implants like hip replacements, knee replacements, and the such, or even artificial hearts, right? That are man-made. These will be more biomechanical fields, or limb replacements, right? Those are biomechanics. There's also biomaterials, the design, the materials that need to go into these like exoskeletons or implants. There's a lot of mechanics that needs to be done and investigated on them. Systems biology, and that's a kind of another one I kind of include in the traditional biomechanics field because it's looking at how subsets of a system interact with one another. So the systems engineering is just the investigation of how systems interact with one another and designing it to make it more efficient. I took one of those classes in grad school, and then there's a new field in that in systems biology and biomedical engineering. Kinesiology is kind of like the biggest, widest spectrum biomechanical field you can have, because you're really kinesiology is looking at the study of movement, human movement, animal movement, plant movement. How do we run? How do we walk? Boise State, where I went to school, they had a big study on soccer or football. How movement, running, planting, twisting, kicking, all that affects the human body and how injuries occur. That's kind of kinesiology. Now, mechanobiology, on the other hand, it focuses on a lot smaller scale, not in terms of breadth, but in terms of the system or the biological organism that we care about. So mechanobiology is really going to be focusing more at the cells, the tissues, and the organs, maybe even down to the atomic level if we're talking about biomaterials with like nanoprinting and so forth. We care about the biophysics, which is like the physics of the cells. How do cells move? How do cells respond to the forces in its environment? Biomolecular engineering. How can we modify cells? How can we modify organisms to produce desired mechanical outcomes or even have better attributes for medical like treatment purposes? There's the one that is really big that everyone probably thought of when you think of biology, which is tissue engineering. there's a lot of mechanobiology and tissue engineering, and a lot of the videos that will be coming out in the future will be talking about tissue engineering in the viewpoint of that, because our organs don't live in isolation, right? In the human body, they live and around or in other types of tissues surrounding them, and everything that touches the liver, everything that the brain is involved with, the fluids, the heart itself, like pumping the blood, and then it being inside of the chest cavity, right? All of those things the tissues are responding to, and they need those signals, which we'll talk about in other videos here, what we mean by that, but they need proper signals based upon their environment to properly develop and function and form. And on top of that, we have also systems biology, because our system really is the cell, the tissues, and the organs, not really going too much, I guess, higher order than that. When mechanobiology isn't too investigating into like running, jumping, and so forth. But there can be, but not as much. So this kind of leads, what really is mechanobiology? What is a good definition of it, right? Well, one thing I can say, let's go into what it is not. It is not, a whole bunch of math. To be honest, it's mechanobiology is my specialty, my field, and what I got my doctorate focus on. And it's not a lot of, let's do all these large calculations, let's do crazy physics. And there's truth that, yes, there are people who do this, but in the broad spectrum of the field of mechanobiology that's growing, we're not really doing hardcore math. We're not really, making robots either, right? We're not mechanistic, right? We're not mechanical engineering, right? We're focusing on what is the mechanics of the biological cells, and how does that then determine tissues and organs. So, what is mechanobiology? It is looking at the cells. How do cells move, right? One of the biggest motile cells in the human body is the immune system, the T cells, right? How do they move? How do they know where to go? How do they know that they're sensing, a stiff tissue like a bone versus a soft tissue like fat, right? Those sort of things. Additionally, another aspect here is, how does our environment that we as humans live in affect the cells, affect the tissues, affect the organs? The example I always give is, we know exercise is great for building and increasing bone density. But how does a cell, a living organism, turn a physical signal into a biomolecular signal, which then the cells respond to, which then the tissue bone responds to, which then the organ system of the skeletal system responds to, which then makes us as a human organism healthier, stronger, right? That's what mechanobiology is really caring about, and that's the prime example of what mechanobiology does. So, here's a definition. Mechanobiology is an emerging multidisciplinary field that encompasses the study of mechanisms by which cells sense and respond to mechanical signals, right? So, both at the cellular level, tissue level, and then the organ level. So, some examples of this is bone cells, osteoblasts, right? These are cells that are in the bone that lay down new bone material, right? So they're producing the bones, increasing the bone density. How do they know to lay down more bone, right? There's general turnover of bones that occur in the human body, just a standard over time, right? Of ranging from 2 to 10 years. Every single bone will have new bone material just replaced 1-to-1. But how does the cells know that, hey, let's increase our bone density? Due to gravity, due to exercise, due to weightlifting. How do they know that? other cells that we care about, chondrocytes. So the cells that make your tendons and ligaments. How do tendons and ligaments repair? How do they affect load bearing, right? Additionally, how can we make them heal better? Like sports medicine and mechanobiology is really coming together because tendons and ligaments are really devoid of any sort of blood vessels. So it's really hard for the cells to come in and repair the tissue, right? So then we typically have a lot of scar tissue build up. So how can we investigate in stimulating the chondrocytes just to produce proper tissue again and not produce scarring? Blood vessels, endothelial cells. Blood vessels are great mechanosensors in the human body because they're always under pressure. Kind of pun intended there, because the blood is being pumped out of the heart. When you go to the doctor, they're taking your systolic and diastolic pressure measurements, which is the pressure when the heart contracts and ejects the blood out of the atrium into your aorta, right? That's that pressure, and diastolic is the pressure, the blood pressure being exerted in the aorta at rest for the heart, right? And we know additionally that our blood vessels, atherosclerosis, can clog, but also that it can sense different types of flow of the fluid of the blood. Laminar flow or turbulent flow has big impacts on blood vessel development and blood vessel health. Another one is plants. Now, we don't really think about plants. We should. The eukaryotic cells that are non-human are just as important. They can teach us new things. Plants are a big mechanical sensor in the environment that are non-human. There's a lot of, when we talk about like mechanical sensors in cells, there are a whole bunch in plants that are also in humans. And so we use them actually to investigate. So like plants need them. We'll just move forward here to like sense like turgid pressure. So water pressure inside of them, right? Because when we go out, if you ever have a garden and you've seen the plant that's hot in the summer and it's wilting, right? It's falling over. It's because it doesn't have enough water in it. So how do plants know that they need to increase their rigidity, to increase their water pressure inside the cells, right? How do they sense that? It's not just like it magically osmosis occurs and the plant cells just fill up, right? It's not that simple. The turgor pressure is really maintained by the cells. And yes, if they don't have enough water, then they'll wilt, but it's a maintained system. It doesn't just randomly occur. So we care about like, okay, how does the plant cells, connect to other cells, right? And convey the water through the plant. How does the plant cells, connect to proteins and the structures that they live in, and to sense certain mechanical forces like wind, right? Sometimes wind on plants can tell it to strengthen one side of the plant versus the other. Or there are some plants that respond to light, right? And so they turn their leaves. How do they know which way is the sun, right? And then they physically turn their leaves to point at the sun, right? How do they know that? A lot of this is just receptors and extracellular proteins that are extended through the cell membrane and connecting into the extracellular matrix to move that cell, move the plants around. In animal cells, right, we require signals not only to maintain health, but to differentiate, right? I have a section that we'll go through in the future on developmental biology. It's really important in developmental biology. My wife teaches developmental biology, and we had a really interesting talk and a subsection of mechanobiology and developmental biology, because we don't think that a fetus in the womb, an embryo, requires mechanical signals to properly form, but it's highly important. One slight change can determine whether a fetus is properly formed or not. The other thing too, on the like full human adult and developing child, our cells need proper mechanical signals to differentiate. So we go from like MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells, they will differentiate into the osteoblasts. Typically, mechanical signals stimulate that differentiation versus a lack of a signal, a lack of mechanical exercise stimulates the mesenchymal stem cells to become adipocytes or fat cells in the bone marrow, right? So we need those signals, mechanical forces to differentiate. As well as in the cell, there is the cytoskeleton, right? We you probably have heard of, which is just a class, 3 different types of proteins that form the mechanical structure for the cell to be supported by. There's also one inside of the nucleus that has the same exact proteins classes, your actin, your microtubules, as well as some subset of those that are more specialized for the nucleus. But the nucleus also has its own skeletal protein structure to maintain proper nuclear shape, as well as regulate gene expression, right? So all of these things, as well as some other like extracellular matrix proteins and sensing capabilities like integrins that are cell adhesion molecules to bind to the substrate and use it to sense the mechanical environment. All of these are required, and I mean they're in animals and plants, but like this class will and video series will really emphasize all of these proteins in animals. But all of these things is what we care about in mechanobiology. Right? It's how do these cells respond to and sense and feel mechanical forces, which then drives proper cellular function and tissue function. So as like an overview of the videos as they'll come out, where this is really going to be kind of like the core emphasis here is like core biology. I call it Bio 111 or just your Bio 101, your generic cell biology, your genetics, right? How do cells properly function? Then we'll also cover some physiological systems. So there's going to be a little bit of anatomy and a little bit of physiology. If you don't have any understanding of these fields or topics, that's fine. My videos will be designed to at least build you up to the point where you can understand what's going on. So it's really designed for both a biologist as well as an engineer, because engineer, you may not have these classes or these understandings, but I'll go through them in depth in the coming videos so that we can all be on the same page. And then we'll culminate all of these things and combine them together to really talk about and learn and understand why these biological and biomechanical principles are affecting the living organism, the cell itself. So I have this PowerPoint image here. I have the reference from the student who made this. It's a great, really visual depiction of like the scale of mechanobiology. So we care about the genetics down at the bottom left-hand side. If we're going left to right, we care about the DNA, how they're getting expressed, how they're getting regulated. Then you move out of that, then mechanobiology next lens would be the cell, looking at how the cell is responding to mechanical forces, right? And then to the third phase, which would be the tissue, right? Because cells, again, are not isolated. They're in a structure, they're in a system, and that system is typically a tissue. And then that tissue also isn't isolated. It's in the organ, which has multiple types of cells and tissue types that could be in there to all perform a certain defined function, which then those organs are all making up a living organism, a human body, right? And they all interacting with one another. And so all these phases here, you can have different viewpoints in. And most of the time, mechanobiology will go up to the tissue. Sometimes it'll go up to the organs. But really, biomechanics and kinesiology are going to be looking at the human level. But everything really tissue and smaller is mechanobiology. One last thing I want to mention here is as you are watching the videos and you're learning these topics, really have this thinking paradigm here for mechanobiology. which is cellular function affects the organismal function or the organ function or the tissue function, right? The larger function. And then the mechanical stimulus can also affect the cellular function and the organismal function, right? Exercise, think that. Running, right? But they all feed one another. Where if you provide mechanical stimulation, you're going to be affecting the cells because you're going to be stimulating, say, increase of bone development. But then that stimulates on the bones are going to be increasing the mesenchymal stem cells to produce the osteoblasts, right? So you're kind of going, this mechanical stimulus is affecting the organ and the cells or the tissue, right? You're going back and forth. But another way to view this too is if you have a scar tissue being produced because of a damage, you're changing the tissue and organ structure, right? That change in stiffness, and most of the time scar tissue is stiff compared to the normal tissue that's there, is the mechanical stimulus. So it's changing the mechanical stimulus, which is then going to be changing your cellular function, where you may not necessarily be having proper function of the cells in that organ. So as we move through these videos, think about this kind of like triangle effect of, how is the mechanical stimulus affecting the cell and the organ? And if we change the mechanical stimulus, what will happen? Or if I change the function of the cell somehow, say cancer, how will it be changing the mechanical forces, and how will it therefore be changing the organ forces, the organ stimulus, or the organ function? So, and there was a little bit longer video here than I typically like to provide, but I think it was a good overview, at least I hope it was, of what mechanobiology is, and I hope you're excited to learn more in depth of what mechanobiology is in the upcoming videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.